wondered, oh, their greed had no equal. But then there came a warrior's call, a battle cry. Ethiopians arose to fight and die for freedom. Do you remember Adwa? Do you remember that day when our forefathers and mothers, they marched for months and stood in the way of...
So you just heard a little bit of Adwa, which is one of our grand prize winners this year. We actually had a tie this year for the first time since I'm aware of, in the Mask, with Adwa and You Are Not Alone by Connor Muller. So I'm here today with Jay Keating, the president of SAW, and Steve Pendlebury, with our special guest, Munit Mesfin, who wrote Adwa. And welcome, Munit. We're happy to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're so excited to talk to you and hear about what you have going on. You are an Ethiopian singer-songwriter. You're also involved in a lot of other projects with, you teach at Carpe Diem, and you've been involved in a lot of social justice projects and working with all kinds of different singer-songwriters as well. So can we start by talking about the song Adwa? It's a lot of us that heard it went to the internet to Google the history of what the story is behind the song. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about what the song is about and what inspired you to write it?
Sure. First, I'd like to say that that's one of the reasons I was happiest, was because it probably would have prompted a lot of people to go and Google it and be like, what is she asking us to remember? So that was really, really nice that happened. Basically, the story of Adwa is the story of how Ethiopia resisted colonialization in the 1800s. So after there was a Berlin conference where the European nations got together and they said, why should we fight each other for territory on Africa? You know, they recognized how much resource there was, they recognized how wealthy it was, and at that point, industrialization is chugging along. So they're like, we're gonna take it, but let's not fight amongst ourselves. So they got very civilized about it. And they actually had a conference in Berlin in 1894, and they sat down and they literally just negotiated with some landmarks, with some rivers, with some things that were natural dividers. I'll take this, you'll take that. And that was the conversation that happened. At that point, Ethiopia as a nation was consolidating as a nation. It used to be like different lords had different kind of like spaces that they were in charge of, but there was an emperor at that point, Emperor Minilik, that was consolidating the nation. And they were consolidated enough to have negotiated with, for example, like, you know, the Italians and whatnot, and had conversations with them. There was relationships that were going on. But at some point, the Italians at that moment decided that, you know, they had Eritrea, which happened in a very kind of almost like, when you read it, you go, really? Like, there was a guy that came and put a little bit of a factory, and eventually that little factory, he put a flag on it, and eventually he had like a lease, 100-year lease, and eventually that somehow evolves into this colonial space. So history is fascinating. So Eritrea, there was an occupation that happened, but then at some point there was this desire to revive the Roman Empire that kind of was always there in the back burner, and they attacked Ethiopia, and the Ethiopian emperor and his Empress Taitu then called on all of the leadership in the country, and they called on all of the lords of the nation and rallied the entire nation from all corners. And they marched up north to where this battle was about to happen. Because if they came into the center, then, you know, that is what colonialization is. You come and take over the center is yours, you have won. So this was about the journey that all of the Ethiopians took up north. I have friends now that do this thing called Guzo Adwa, which is Journey to Adwa, where they start from the capital city and they actually literally physically march to the location of Adwa. And it takes them about a month and a half, almost two.
Oh, wow. So
this is, imagine, hundreds of thousands of people marching up, men, women, people that are feeding the soldiers. Some women might have had their children with them. There was always also a warrior chanters, you know, people that would like, you know, encourage the people with music, and they'll go, you know, singing along the journey through, you know, rural Ethiopia at that point in the 1800s. And actually Ethiopia won 3 times. There was a battle at Ambalage is a town in Ethiopia, a battle at Mekelle, another town, and then final battle where we won for the third time was Adwa, and was such a resounding success of a victory that the Italians were pushed back to Eritrea. And at that point, because the troops were kind of like very exhausted and resources were kind of dwindling, the emperor decided he's not going to push them all the way out of Eritrea, stopped at that point, which had negative consequences down the line. History, it is what it is. Hindsight is 2020. But at that point, they said, all right, this is enough. And then that was the victory. And that kept Ethiopia independent, while every other country in the African continent, except for Liberia, through another, political arrangement with Americans that, had kind of come over to Liberia and had it as a free space. Ethiopia was the only nation that never experienced colonialism. And so that song was kind of my homage to that, the people's power, how the Ethiopian people with leadership that was very strategic and skillful did something that no other nation had done, which is significant because then consequentially, a lot of African nations looked to Ethiopia as this free state. Ethiopia had its own kings, it had its own emperors, it had its own kind of, even visually and aesthetically looking, is an African nation with kings, queens, lords, at a time when Africa was going through colonialism. Italy then came in the 1930s with Mussolini and did occupy Ethiopia for 5 years, but it was a 5-year occupation that never really resulted in full-blown kind of a colonial experience. So it kind of led to Ethiopia also being the house of the Organization of African Unity, which was established to advocate for other nations to be freed. It led to like half the African countries having green, yellow, reds in their flags because they were so inspired. Everybody was kind of looking to Ethiopia as a beacon of hope and as a beacon of, liberation. Even when Haile Selassie, the emperor in the 1930s, went to the League of Nations, we were the African nation that was a member of the League of Nations before it was the United Nations. And when Mussolini attacked, he had a speech that said, this is the last nail in the coffin of this League of Nations, and basically declared this is world war now because we are being, as an independent nation, attacked and you are doing nothing. And that speech that Haile Selassie did is actually, I don't know if you know, but it's a song by Bob Marley called War. So until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is utterly and finally discredited, everywhere there's war, he made it into a song from that speech. So this legacy of Ethiopia being such an incredibly powerful name across the globe. Biblically, we exist. In Islam, we're very prominent as the first place that the Mohammedan followers came to and got refuge. And now politically, it was the African nation that was freed enough and independent enough to speak on behalf of the continent. So this whole Pan-African situation kind of got birthed from that victory onwards. So I wanted to pay homage to that and also remind the Pan-African community, which has forgotten, and also sing it for my children who don't know about it. And my children are half Ethiopian, half Haitian, brought up in America, lived in Ethiopia. So they're this diasporic babies, so many diasporic babies. And I wanted them to know about this history. And, English dominates the world linguistically. I wanted it to have English to tell the story, Amharic, and that traditional warrior chanter thing to almost call back to what those warrior chanters would have sounded like at that battle. And then also the final piece being an Amharic to say to this new generation of Ethiopians, we have so much more to do. So it was this kind of continuum that I thought about doing. Yeah. Long answer to your question.
But a great story, and one people could go and read more about. That I think that's really part of what I love about your song is that it inspires people to look, and what they see is such a rich tapestry of things they can follow.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, obviously, history is complicated. In every history, there's a lot of complications. But every once in a while, there's just this triumph, against colonialism and slavery that you just kind of have to say, well, yes, that should be applauded and uplifted. And again, in the impact, I think there was an Ethiopianism movement in South Africa and Harlem. There's an Abyssinian church. There's so many ways that moment just really uplifted the imagination of Black people globally. The entire Rastafarianism movement comes also kind of in that line and vein of thinking of there is a land that is a holy land that is somehow more than just a nation. It has something mystical around it. And I'm for it. I'm all like, yes, please, big it up so that we can have better things to come for our children. But it was just something that there's a song by Gigi. I would definitely recommend everybody hear that song by an artist called Gigi, Gigi. She's an Ethiopian, just amazing songstress. And she has an amazing song for Adwa that she wrote. Actually, the movie premiere of Haile Garima, who's another very important person in Ethiopia. He's a director who lives here in the DC area, has a place called Sankofa Books and Video. He's about to be honored by the Academy. I think is it the Academy or the Oscar organized? So there's one of them that's honoring Haile Garima and Sophia Loren together, which I thought was funny because, she's Italian.
Yes. There's a connection.
There's a connection. So at Haile Garima's movie Adwa, Gigi wrote in I think 2 days, this amazing epic song about Adwa in Amharic. Every year we hear that song 100 times on that day. So part of me was also like, I gotta do this. There needs to be one for, again, a global community because she speaks to us and we are so moved. And I wanted to speak a little bit to the Pan-African collective, the global collective, and the next generation.
Well, great. The song really does that. Talk a little bit about your process writing the song. You're so inspired by this history. Did you have the idea, I want to write this, and then did you look for the music first? Did you pretty much have, I want to do English and Americ to get, what was your process in terms of writing it? So
the process, when I was in Ethiopia, I had moved back to Ethiopia for 7 years, from 2011 to about 3 years ago or so, 2010 till 3 years ago. While I was there, I would do these festivals with a friend of mine around Adwa through the arts. And it was really like a conscientious remembering of that particular history, because even in Ethiopia, we'd kind of taken it for granted. And now it's really being uplifted in a way that's pretty powerful. So that had been in my mind and playing in my head for some time. But in terms of writing it, the way that I did this was stream of consciousness-ish, So what I normally do is I start recording things on my song while I'm driving. And so I wanted it to kind of start from the context of what prompted this desire to invade. It wasn't just, it was a context. It was the Berlin Conference. And there was something, the Berlin Conference just makes my blood boil. It aggravates me because it's couched under this whole civilized thing, why fight? We can just divide, as if there was just nobody on the ground, as if there were entire cultures and spaces and people and histories and interactions. Till this day, the Berlin Conference has consequences that are just constantly showing up with these borders that we didn't determine these borders. And so that always aggravated me. The fact that we have taken these borders seriously aggravates me too, So as an African, I'm annoyed by us that we take these borders seriously. So I wanted to kind of remind us too that, we didn't make this up. This was people going, yes, for you. It was annoying. So I wanted to start from that. But the process of this particular song was just singing it out loud. Then I did, thank you very much, GarageBand, an a cappella arrangement. So I'm going dun 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 dun, and then I did this whole thing. It was very, very mellow, but I did it, and it wasn't a sad and annoying do you remember Adwa kind of thing. Thank goodness for musician friends. So when I went to Ethiopia about 2 weeks before Adwa celebration, I have a saxophone playing brother. So the sax player that you hear there is actually my brother Munit Mesfin. So he's there. I have a producer friend, Abagazu, who's amazing. A lot of Ethiopian artists have been produced by Abagazu Kibroakshiota. He's another one of our gems. A friend of mine, Thomas Gobena, who's a bass player for a punk rock band called Gogol Bordello. He was there visiting. And I was like, Thomas, you're here? What? Let's just get this thing done. And it was literally 2 weeks or a week before the Adwa celebration day that I was visiting. And he happened to be in town. And my brother's there and he's there. And I'm like, can you guys just please do me this favor? I never asked for anything. Just want to get this song done for Adwa. And they're like, it's in 4 days. I'm like, we can do it. We're smart. We're talented. So I basically locked us in the room and then had them do the groove better than I sang it, clearly. And then I wanted it to be epic. That was a word I used a lot. I wanted to be epic. And so when they're like, what do you want the drums to sound like? And there's this drum called Nagarit, which is actually back in the days, this huge drum in Ethiopia that would travel for war. And they said that it was made with I apologize to all lions everywhere, but back in the days, they used to call it like the skin of the lion. That's what this drum was made of. So when you hit it, it roars like a lion. So I wanted like da-da-da-da, like that kind of sound. So I was clear that I wanted it to sound big and just like imposing. And then we wanted to then get these Ethiopian elements. And I knew Gash Gashau, who does the male voice, from our Adwa festival. So I went and I got him, and he's old. And I was like, I want that texture, you know, like of these old warrior type people. And he had somebody he recommended, and it was adorable. She couldn't hear the key that we were singing in. So she sang in whatever key she wanted. And we tried 5 times to get her to sing in our key, and it wouldn't work. And I was like, Abagaz, let's just modulate to her and modulate away from her, because I want her voice, but we can't force it. So let's just do that. And it ended up being such an interesting texture as well. And then at the end, we actually used a tiny piece of a poem by a poet laureate that is, again, one of the most amazing Pan-African poets. His name is Gash Sagai Gabremedin. And I know his daughters, and I knew him when he was alive, and he was fantastic. And so he has this one poem called Wa Yachi Adwa, which means beware of that Adwa. And then it's like this long poem. And I'm like, well, I can't use this long poem. That's just too long. But I wanted just that phrase. So I called his daughters and I'm like, can I use the phrase Wa Yachi Adwa? And they're like, sure. And I'm like, okay, good. Wa Yachi Adwa, Wa. And then I'm like, oh God, this song is actually becoming a song. And it literally was mastered the night before the Adwa celebration. So the next day, my friends and I burnt it on a CD and went to all the DJs that we knew, distributed it. At night, at midnight, I'm making the video that you saw on iMovie going, I can do this. So it was like the fact that this song has come to this point is fantastic, because all of it was just magical. Like the process was magical. The way that it's like every time Adwa comes now, Gigi plays and then I play is magical. The fact that my daughters are singing it is magical. And so it's been this just amazing kind of, I made it happen by sheer like, let's make it kind of feeling. But it was an a cappella arrangement that went into the hands of better people who then interpreted it as well as they did. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like, you know, the process, I sent the song in the middle to Haile Garima and said, what do you think? Because he had that whole Adwa piece and he's like, it made me cry. I'm like, oh my God, you were moved? Okay, great. I sent it to another friend of mine who's a poet, Lemon Seaside, who had this, again, epic, beautiful poem. He's based out of England on Adwa. And I'm like, what do you think? And he's a wordsmith. So he's like, I like it. I'm like, okay, great. So I kept like sending the song to a few people to just kind of say, do I sound ridiculous? Does this make sense to you? Does it resonate? So it had like a very collective, like just goodwill behind it.
Yeah, no, that's such a great picture of a process that's so collaborative, and yet your vision is what's pushing it all the way through. And I guess that's the challenge for all songwriters is how do you go from I have an idea to a song like, you know, a finished product like Adwa, and that little journey you took us on is a classic version of that working out really well.
Yeah, I mean, and like not every song goes through this much adrenaline, but definitely with this one, there were just really key points where, you know, an idea would be like, what do you think? And there was always a person that goes, yes, let's, you know, there was like a little bit of that kind of desire also, because it's such an important topic and I wanted to handle it well. I don't normally ask for this much input. You know, I'm normally like, I got a song, there it is, bam. Yeah. But with this one, I really wanted to just kind of get people's feedback and, you know, that poem being part of it, and you know, those voices of Gash Gashau and Mamuye being part of it. Like those things all just felt so good. And with them, I didn't tell them what to do because they know what to do. They know warrior chanting. So warrior chants, I'm not going to try to be a warrior. That's not who I am. But like, there's a certain part of it that I'm just like, but I don't want, specifically, I didn't want them to name anybody. That was one thing I asked. Don't name a specific king. Don't name a specific lord, because that gets into slightly murky waters because everybody judges everyone these days, you know? So I really wanted it to kind of be a people's thing, a people's victory, a people's movement, and a people's situation. So I get a lot of feedback that's like, if you don't mention the king and queen, and I go, but it's on purpose. I wanted it to be a people's thing. Obviously, the emperor and the empress were a strategy. They are obviously calling everybody to arms. Obviously, the lords that were there are the people that direct the war, you know? So clearly leadership, yes, 100% and 100 times over, yes. But it's also human beings of all kinds of shape, size, ability, color, like, you know, even from the Ethiopian context, all kinds of languages. And I like, and some of them, I mean, facts are facts. Some of them probably didn't want to go and die at war, but they did it because they were called. And some of them were really in line with it and they did it and because they were called. And I wanted it really to be about the movement. So that was the only kind of like guidance that I had for them. But it was really just, it was kind of a magical thing, definitely.
Yeah.
Right.
What, you know, epic was such a great word to describe this. You know, I was looking for and you came up with it, but that's the sense I got when I heard this song for the first time. You know, even though I did not know initially what it was all about, I got that feeling right away from the, you know, the drums and then the chanting at the end. And I said, you know, I get where this is coming from, even though I don't necessarily have the background. So comparing that sort of songwriting to, say, the American songwriting tradition, which maybe goes back 300 years at most, we're talking about an Ethiopian musical tradition that goes back 3,000 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as you said, some of the instruments that are used are from biblical times and still used today. Where does this whole thing fit into that long tradition of songwriting that you come from?
Songwriting is so important in Ethiopia. I didn't realize just how much myself, because I left when I was young. But one of the first songs that I wrote was called Noro Noro. And it was about literally me saying to myself, you know, do you want to go this direction and look forward in the side of music, or do you want to not? And Noro Noro means if only, like if I had done this, I didn't want to regret anything. So it was a song specifically written for myself about choices and not regretting things. And when I wrote that song and I performed it, it was the first time I performed it, the place was super quiet. It's a really groovy song. And I'm like grooving away and going, why are they so quiet? And at the end of the first verse, they clapped for the first verse. And I was like, what are they doing? Like, why are they? And it was because they were literally sitting there listening to every word. So words are really powerful in Ethiopia. Like the musical quality, not so much sometimes, you know, like in terms of sonically, that isn't as important as what are you saying. So it could be like a one keyboard production with the wrong majors and minors and chords. But if the words are done right, then that is what's most important. So for instance, in Ethiopia, I have friends that do these poetry events every month. You have to fight to get in. There are about 500 to 600 people. That crowd of space, you can barely breathe. It's called Opia Poetic Jazz. And it's poetic jazz, so that my brother and his band were part of the band that was accompanying them. So they'll be in the back, and these poets will come and they'll present, and it will be in front of, without exaggeration, 600 people, and the rest had to be turned back for poetry. And you would find people like bootlegging, like whatever, the tickets in the back. I got one, you want one? Like, and this is poetry, just for words. So poetry is important. We have this tradition called the Asmaris. And at one point, being an Asmari, like in every, I'm sure, tradition somewhere, being a musician can kind of be looked down upon. So if you were called an Asmari, they used to like poo-poo on you a little bit. But it's these traditional people playing a masinko, which is this one string kind of bowed instrument. And then the kirar, which is what you mentioned, which is like the harp type of instrument. And basically, they would bring this mode of poetry that's called Semina work, which is kind of like the wax and gold, where there's like the obvious truth, and underneath it, there's a secret truth that's a political jab, maybe, or a social commentary on what's going on. And they would be called by the kings almost, you know, to the king's court to make this kind of music. And now, in even like some places where this tradition is very much alive and well, you would just throw a word at them and they'd basically freestyle with their masinko. So words are very important. Contextualizing, playing around with, being kind of like very a roundabout it type of way of writing songs, and like writing poetry is very much normal. In fact, when I got there and I was writing my own songs, people were weirded out by it, because they were like, "What are you doing writing your own music?" I'm like, "Aren't you supposed to write your own songs?" So in Ethiopia, with production of songs, normally there is the person who performs it. Yes, he gets the most and she gets the most famous, but the writers of melody is his own person, and a writer of words is his own person. So there was a lyricist, just words, not necessarily lyrics and music, just melody, and then somebody who will arrange it, and then somebody who will perform it. So when I got there and I brought this singer-songwriter kind of vibe, it really it helped the next generation of people that came before me. Like, I didn't know I was breaking rules, really. Like, I was just kind of going, but I feel like this. And they were looking at me like, yeah, but you sound like a child. And I'm like, because I'm using simple words? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, but that's how I feel. So I had to almost kind of justify myself. But in terms of like, now there's more singer-songwriters playing with a guitar, making up things. And I'm like, yay, yes, because all of this should be possible. But words are very significant. And I can't speak a lot about the languages that I don't know, but I'm assuming that it is just as important in Orominya and Tigrinya as much as it is in in Guraginya or Amharic or whatever it is. Because like I said, it's, patriotism is a big thing. Love of country is a big thing that comes up. A lot of melancholic, sad songs come up. Kenny Rogers was famous in Ethiopia. John Williams was famous in Ethiopia. So we almost kind of like have a country soul to us, like melancholic, heart-wrenching storytelling, that kind of thing. But yeah.
That's funny. Somebody the other day, one of the Fidel band guys was talking about country music in Ethiopia, and I, as I understood it, that is the Ethiopian country music, right? But then I thought, were they listening to, like you said, were listening to Don Williams? Well, yes, they were listening to Don Williams. Oh my goodness, what?
We mourned his passing, and Kenny Rogers is passing, and a few other people because they really do tell the story, and there's this melancholy. And to this day, when I hear country, I'm like, oh, like there's a part of me.
What an interesting connection.
And I didn't know who Don Williams was until I got here. And, Kenny came with Dolly Parton, and, I didn't know about the past of Dolly Parton, but after a certain point, my coat of many colors was something that we used to sing back home in the city with bootleg tapes. Yeah.
So another thing that I noticed from doing a light deep dive on you is that you are seem to have social justice and working for people as like a thread through your life. You moved to India with your mother, and then where'd you go after that? Before you came home?
To Namibia in Southwest Africa. In Namibia, I came to the States. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've moved around a lot, been around that kind of thing. And you're, tell us now, you're working now at Carpe Diem. Are you teaching? What are you doing there?
Yeah. So the moving around with my mother definitely was one of the best parts of my life. It made such a huge impact in understanding humanity and all its human and universal struggles. Right now, I'm doing multiple things. One of them is definitely Carpe Diem Arts. Carpe Diem is based out of Tacoma Park, and they've been doing a lot of programming around arts and children. So there's a program called Jumpstart with the Arts, which is about arts integration for the kids to love going to school, and arts integration to make them enjoy the process. The way I got into it was actually through the Wolf Trap Performing Arts Center, and they have an education arm. And actually, it was Ben Hall from Fidel Band, the trombone player, who was like, I think you'll be good at this, who recommended me for the Wolf Trap. And then they recruit artists to become teaching artists, to go into classroom and to do arts integration kind of guidance for the teachers, so that, it's not just let's go outside, it's let's put on a jacket and go outside. And the kids are like, yeah, let's do it, like that kind of simple things to kind of make things smooth and enjoyable. So with Carpe Diem, there's the Jumpstart, like with the arts, that also focuses on the preschooler age and how to make them love school, be exposed to wonderful arts and artists. There's amazing artists in this area that are like doing great work around children. Mr. Lilo was one of the people that was also a Ben Hall connection, and he's done a lot of things with us. And so there's that. And then there's another program that I do with Carpe Diem, which is called Youths on the Move. And this is concept that, kids get recorders. when they're maybe in third grade or something, and parents cry, and then they get violins and then parents cry some more. But instead, if you got a ukulele, it actually would help the songwriting process, right? So it's very small, great for little hands. They can strum a C and an A minor and an F and a G in 2 seconds, and then they can songwrite. So I think even a Songwriters Association of Washington, I feel like y'all should be champions for this Ukes on the Move concept, because it's really about encouraging songwriting from the earliest stages, from third grade and fourth grade, and just trying to get as many ukuleles into as many hands as possible so that the kids can be immediately just making up songs, singing along and things like that. And then it also has like an arm that does social justice work, and how, again, having the artists be basically enrolled in really pushing social justice forward. I'm also working with this organization called the Civic Circle, which is literally about how to promote democracy and democratic thinking in youth, again, through the arts, through collective songwriting. So in April, I'll be doing after-school activities with them, collectively doing songs around what they call the 7 steps to democracy. So there is definitely civic involvement, social justice. My mother was a public health officer, so she's constantly concerned about the health of a community, which is not just the absence of sickness, but the presence of wellness, with all that means. Human rights was some of the things that were just drummed into me from the beginning, not for some humans, but for all humans without exception. My father was a soil scientist, and he was into natural resource development and environmental protection. He was a minister at one point for natural resources and environmental protection. And so it was always about the earth matters. We are all salt of the earth, and we need to protect the salt of the earth. The most vulnerable of us needs to be protected. If they're not protected, it's all going to be bad for all of us. Like, it's, you can't ignore an entire class of human beings and expect everything to go well. Was always part of my upbringing. And when it came to songwriting, what I actually found was I suck at love songs. And it's something I don't know if I'm proud of it or ashamed of it.
That's the headline of this. That is now the headline of this interview. I suck at love songs. Bye.
Yep, that's right. I think I got it. Well,
you got it.
There are other
It's
things.
all how you look at it, because you're writing love songs for the earth and love songs for all humanity, and
right.
they're just different types of love songs.
And the save goes to Kelly. And the save goes to Kelly there.
So that was part of the things. Like, whenever I wanted to write about something, it was kind of like, be a better human, kind of was at the essence of it, just do better, try to do better, know better, look at yourself internally, assess yourself, more self-reflection than anything else. I don't like reactionary things. I don't like extremes. I don't like absolutes, so it's always about just calm down, process, think, are you doing the right thing for everyone? Now move forward. So in the mix of all this, nobody likes somebody who's in the middle. And who's like all the humans, not just your people, not just my people, and even ethnically speaking, I'm 5 or 6 Ethiopian ethnicities. And if I did the DNA, I could be 5 or 6 different names too, so I'm always aware of, I'm a product of eons of making, my father was like, yeah, we're Stardust, before Joni Mitchell was like, we were Stardust. My father was telling me about Stardust, and I'm like, yeah. And if that's the case, then a lot of these things that we are hung up on is meaningless. We're just like a speck, and then we're gone. So in this moment of being a speck in a meat bag with some bones, just try to do good. It's kind of where it ends up for me.
Yeah. Well, that's a great philosophy, and I just really admire people who can take and lead their whole life with intent, and it looks from the outside. I know that to you it probably looks like a messy stumbling through history, but it looks from the outside like that's what you're doing. So we're all jealous of you for that ability. So just keep the illusion up. Keep the illusion up.
Yeah. I'll keep the illusion going. I got it together. Everything is fine.
And so talk about family life now. Are your kids musical? Are they interested in this, or are they no, you do that, Mom, and I do this? How do you balance that out?
How do I balance? Well, I have 3 kids. I have a 14-year-old son and 2 girls, 10 and 7. Because of COVID, the girls and I have started to do things together. And we actually came across, because of Carpe Diem Arts, this organization called the Children's Music Network. And they had a jam session. And I'm like, you want a jam session? Let's do a jam session. They're like, what are we going to sing? Let's sing about Africa. Okay. And we did this little jam session around Africa. And they loved it so much. They were like, can you sing for the closing? And we're like, we don't have any material, but sure. We just made this one up for like 2 days ago. And so we actually wrote a song in the morning. Well, I wrote it. We performed it. And that song was so awesome that we've been performing it in many different contexts. And so now with my girls, while they're still adorable, I'm going to be doing this project called Munit and Z Love Bugs, Love Bug 1, Love Bug 2. And they've gotten now used to, it's time to perform. And they come and we do our little Zoom thing. So with Carpe Diem, we're going to actually be performing in the May episode of Jumpstart with the Arts. So I've suckered them. I mean, I've inspired them. I've inspired them in, and I've kind of like created this code word for you're getting on my nerves, so that we can also work well together. So they're into it, particularly the last one. I toured the most while I was pregnant with her. So she was born with rhythm, and she's just got like songs going out of her every day from morning till noon to night. With my son, he's very good at the fast rapping, but he's more into like the audio visual part of things. So, he might be coming to you guys for internships or something at some point. So I'm trying to get him to be our camera guy and our sound engineer.
Oh, we'll put him to work for sure.
Work him to the bones, because I think, everybody has like creativity, and he's the kind of person who's not 100% clear about, like the boy that's like, I don't know, like that guy. I think it's also a consequence of being 14. I don't know, but at the same time, he likes the camera, so we're trying to get him to do that. But it's been something that I've been saying we'll do, which is like, music and arts around, particularly also Amharic language and African history and geography. Whenever I'm doing Carpe Diem Arts after school activities, what I do is I teach African immigrants' children about Africa. So there's this whole song about the 54 countries plus 1 territory, because we want to big up Western Sahara, even if Morocco doesn't want to let it go. all of these things and all of these songs with them. So now there's a whole host of like 3rd, 4th, and 5th and 2nd graders that know all the 54 countries and 1 territories of Africa, and it's great. It's great to be able for them to, first of all, identify the continent, because a lot of the times we assume kids know what we know, and then you realize, well, no, they don't. Like, when I'll be like, where's Ethiopia? And they're like, and just getting them to identify those kinds of things. So with the kids, I've always said we're going to do something around geography, around Africa, around history, and just highlight some of the highlights. Like there were empires, just that, and that in itself has a huge impact. There were giant schools of learning. The first universities were in the continent. The first astronomers were in the continent. There was amazing like networks and trade routes and things that were happening in the continent prior to all of the things that we now hear about the continent. So kind of doing just a simple arc of there was, and then is, like, where we are now is a consequence of things happening. Life is dynamic, history is dynamic. Africa is definitely now on the rise in terms of economics, and politically it's still got like some countries that are struggling. There's still conflict, but there is a lot that's going on as well. So it's kind of to understand that where we are now is a consequence of things, but we've also been here. So just give them that overview. And then after that, they can make better decisions and not be so concerned to say they come from Africa. Just to have a little bit of, yeah, I'm African, first university, whatever, like they might say. But so with the kids, we've been doing music around that. And yesterday I met somebody who was like, I would like to, work on kids' music, recording. And a friend of mine who just won the Grammy for children's music, her name is Joni Leeds, who I met through the Women's Music Network. She just did her album, and it was called All the Ladies, and it was all by like women producers and engineers. So I was so inspired. Like I was like, I'd like a woman to do ours too. So like, because I'm like, that would be great for my kids to watch a woman engineer, and she's a Black woman, and she has this place called Our Street Studio, and she's lovely. I met her yesterday, and we're like, oh, where do you go to get your dreads done? Maybe we could go there and get our dreads done together. So this rapport that we're creating as well. So with Munit and the Love Bugs, while they're cute and adorable, is when we're gonna try to get that done.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, what for you and your music, for what you want to do now going forward? What are you involved in something? I know from having a band with my teenage children that will have a lifespan, and then they'll be like, I'm too cool. But treasure it. It's a wonderful thing to have and do. But what about for you? What do you want to do with music for the next 20, 50 years, whatever you're doing?
Well, I'd like to age like fine wine with music. Well, right now, one of the things that I was doing before the girls and I started doing the stuff is I was working on my album, about 6 of the songs are done. I came back from Ethiopia last year. I visited and I did some more recording with my friends out there. And I came back with the intention of, okay, March. I landed here at like February 10 or 15. I'm like, all right, March, we're going to go into Tonal Park because it's big. And they've got like everybody that's awesome. Tonal Park is another cool place where you walk in, there's a whole host of Ethiopian artists that are, my friends from Ethiopia send their music to Tonal Park for mixing and mastering. So there's this whole relationship that's been going on. So I had plans that ended on March 13. So now we're going to do it the dumb way, where it's like one person records and another person records, and then the drummer gets to go to Tonal Park. So we're going to do that with this album. I'm trying to go back to Ethiopia in May. So at least have one single be released in May. Adwa is actually going to be included in this album because it was just there as a unit by itself hanging out. So it will be the most unique song, I think, from all the other songs because it was it just had its own little world. But that album is something that needs to get done this year. I've said, okay, my birthday's in August. That's it. If after that, it's gonna die. This album will die because it's been with me for some time. But outside of that, Project Locrea is a brand that I perform with here, and I love working with them because it's just this amazing global connection. I have like a Bulgarian flautist, an Argentinian guitarist, a Chinese dulcimer player, and we've got other Latin American and American people playing the bass and the drums and whatnot. So we've been doing things together, which has been super fun. But also for me now, I think Adwa this year, one of the things that I thought was, what hasn't been done is a reggae art album by an Ethiopian woman. And so the thing was like, bing, where I'm like, we're going to do this. And then I think Lauryn Hill has a song called To Zion, to her son, which is when she was pregnant with her child and they were telling her to stop music and she kept going, and good job, Lauren. And it's called To Zion. And I'm like, oh my God, we're going to call this one From Zion. And it's going to be because we're Zion in Ethiopia. So that's a dream that I have. But definitely because of the fact that, again, my Pan-African nature comes out the most when I listen to reggae. It's just, reggae music is one of the things that really traverses the continent and also connects with the islands and connects with just so many interesting historical ways, like Marcus Garvey. What does that mean? All of these things. But there's a certain Pan-African nature about it that I really want to do. But beyond that too, I think, with Steve, we talked about Ethio jazz. There's an entire, my brother is very much one of the people that are like the next generation of the Ethio jazz, masters. Mesfin, and his band is there's a band called Wudasi that he was a part of that is amazing. It didn't stay together for long, but just seeing how Ethio jazz has also gotten so much traction around the world, that has also been something that I've been like, what? I love jazz. I grew up with jazz. I would like to do one that is really in the kind of like in the vibe of what that was, because there is a vibe about it. There's a sonic vibe about it and a certain kind of groove about it that really resonates with me. So before I die, I do one Ethio jazz, one reggae, one Munit love vibes, and then, get this thing done on my birthday. Then I could just be like, that's good.
Well, that's great, because that's exactly what I was looking for, is to have that kind of vision, as a music as a life. Music as part of the way you express, but also the way you live and everything like that is I think one of the best uses of music. And a lot of times in this world of songwriting and can I get somebody to record my song? Can I make some money off my song? And people get lost in that. And the sheer joy of being in music, of living in music, is the thing that to me makes it transcendent and really worthwhile. I hear that in what you're saying.
I never trusted music for money. Like, I think that's also the point, was even in the decision-making process of which direction do I go, I know that I just feel so much joy sharing music. Like, for me, music was the joy. I don't even like studios. I'm a live performer. Like, that's where I'm the happiest. So for me, it's always been about the exchange and the interchange. And, it's a dialogue between audience and person. And it's a storytelling tool. I think in the long run, when I'm actually like maybe too tired to be like I don't know. I don't think touring, I don't know, is touring coming back or no? But I think in the long run, it really would be about teaching, like even when it comes to like the sound engineering part. One of the conversations that I was having with this woman, Holly, that I met, at our street studios, was she wants to teach young women how to be engineers. And even in the Ethiopian context and anywhere else, you find that women are just not really doing much of the production stuff. I might not be the best arranger, but I think, instrumentally, there's a few things that I play, but really more so than that, it's nerve-wracking even as a woman going into a studio where you're like, I'm surrounded by a bunch of men that speak a language I don't really quite understand. There's something like that's just nerve-wracking about that. So I've made a challenge to myself to not become one of those, equipment buying addict of equipment, but to be very involved in the technical side of things a little bit more. Even with children and the children's project, it's always easier to do it in the comfort of your home because there are kids, but also at least do as much of it as you can, and somehow transfer that knowledge over in the long run to Ethiopia, because I definitely want to go back to Ethiopia. I think I want to be old and try to, I'm not going to try to die, but I wouldn't mind just being old and dying in Ethiopia. So I keep thinking about when I return, education is where I would still like to be, around educating kids and educating kids with the arts and using the arts and encouraging people to be on the side of both performance and recording. So it's all in there. It's all a matter of time and, a matter of energy. The kids are getting older and they can make their own lunches now. So, hey, I'm almost there.
That's so great. And I'm exhausted just hearing your plans for the rest of your life. I'm ready to lay down and die just hearing this plan. It has been just such a great pleasure to meet you finally online and to get a little understanding of a woman who wrote this song. I was impressed by the song on so many levels, and I'm impressed by you on so many levels. Keep up the good work and let us at SAW know what you're doing and let us know how to help, because songwriters like you are why we do everything we do.
Thank you. And I definitely want to do a big shout out to Steve here, because had we not met at that concert and he said, because it was a different song that you had heard, you didn't hear it at that point, but he heard another song called Didn't Care, which was a finalist in the Freedom category. And he was like, if you haven't, this song needs to be in this competition. And Christian Perez, who's the guitarist that I work with, who actually also has, I think, 2 songs as part of the finalist of his instrumentals. Yeah. We both said, oh yeah, that contest, we always forget the deadline. And I think I came in on the day and there was like an extension of the deadline that had happened.
Yes,
and we were like, phew. And had Steve not reminded us, none of this would have kind of unfolded in the way that it had. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you,
Steve.
Thank you, Munit. Thank you for the music.
No, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we're going to be checking in with you in the future. And seriously, let us know what you're doing so that we can bother other people to come and take a look at it, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And with bravery,
Thanks.
sacrifice
Bye.
for our dignity in this African family.